So good morning, everyone. So I don't want to skip over some of the basics of this, and we hear this gospel very often. First of all, this is, in seminary, it was understood and declared that this is one of the hardest scriptures to preach about because it is very complicated. It's very complicated because of the outcome. But before we get there, let's talk about this first. Please recognize in Jesus' world, it is structured in very similar ways as the world we live in. There are people who have, and the people who have hire people who end up watching over their possessions. We do that all the time. If any of you have investments, we trust an investor with our money, and we hope that when we get the paper, quarterly, it shows an improvement and not a downfall. But generally speaking, we do this quite commonly. It's very common. The same is true in Jesus' day. In the very same way that when we entrust our belongings to someone, we worry about whether or not that person is being honest with what belongs to us, Jesus is highlighting a story here where there is this steward, and word gets back to the master, his boss, that this steward is being loose and not caring for his property in a proper way. So he calls in the steward and says, listen, before we go any further in our relationship, and by the way, you're probably getting fired, please make account for what it is that you have been doing all this time. So the steward gets worried, and he asks himself, how am I supposed to survive this now that I'm getting fired? Who's going to hire me? Because my reputation will be damaged, and no one would want to hire me. So he goes ahead and he calls in different people who owe his boss property, money, goods, oil, and wheat, clearly in this story. And he negotiates and tells them to drop it by a certain percentage. Now, you and I think that in some way, shape, or form, what he is doing is he is continuing to cheat his boss, because if you owe 100 barrels of olive oil and now you only owe 60, then who did the other 40 barrels belong to? Probably your boss. Why are you cheating your boss all the more now to do that? Please understand that is not what is happening in this parable. See, in Jesus' day, and who knows, probably you could find some example of it in our world, it was very common, and we saw this in tax collectors, right? We have a story about a tax collector who has to collect a certain amount of tax from an individual, from the people of a town, and what does a tax collector do? They add to the tax that is owed so that the tax collector takes the money and sticks it in his pocket. The steward is doing exactly the same thing. See, he's using his boss's goods, and he is leveraging them so that he's making more off of it, because if the guy only owed 60 or 80 of whatever, he's added another 20 or 40 to it. Why? Not for his boss. His boss isn't benefiting from that. He is, personally. So then he goes ahead, and we see in the story, now he calls in all these people and he renegotiates the contracts with them. See, what is unknown is whether or not the people he is renegotiating the contract with are really aware that what he is doing is simply removing his portion of what he added to it, because as the boss's representative, he could go up to anybody and say, oh, by the way, my boss wants $100 from you. Now, the boss might only want 50, but the guy doesn't know any different. And it's a boss. He owns things. He's powerful. And because he is indebted to him, of course he says, okay, I'll pay the $100, right? So what the people that he is telling to take the promissory note, and notice, and this is really keen, and if you've done any type of legal work here, that would be you. Lawyers among us, they love this story. You know why they love this story? Take the promissory note, sit down quickly, and make it another number. It's not in the steward's hand. The person themselves is the one making the correction. They're correcting their own promissory note. which really generally means that when the boss hires a new steward to come in and take a look at those books, he's going to see that these people changed the numbers, not the steward. So there's a really good chance that these people are going to get stuck paying the full amount anyway, if not more, because they will be seen as being shrewd and being unfair and cheating. So notice the steward's signature and his hand is nowhere on this paperwork. He tells them to change the numbers. He's not stupid. This way it can't come back to him. It can't come back and he can't get caught that he actually owed this and now he's changing it to this. Well, all the new steward will know, all the boss will know, is that somewhere along the way, this number got changed and I'm owed this full amount. So really the people that he is calling in, hoping that they will be nice to him when he gets kicked out of a job. See, this is why he is doing this. If these people owe his boss money and he now appears to be the one who is adjusting it in their favor, though again, it's not in his signature, it's in theirs, that ultimately when he's out of a job, these people might be willing to hire him. This is the shrewdness of where this guy's coming from. He's looking out for his own good. And what I really love about this is he says, I can't dig ditches, and I'm not good at begging. So he already knows he needs to get another job that is equal to the job he already had, because anything less than that, he's not going to be able to do it, right? So what you have in this gospel is a very human dynamic that even today in our society, we can see bits and pieces of that really very closely resemble much of what we go on here. The interesting thing here is that the owner says to the steward, "How shrewd of you," and ultimately he never gets fired. The boss keeps him because he appreciates his shrewdness. Now, that's the kicker. Why would Jesus possibly be affirming the fact that an individual has been so shrewd and so backhanded that, one, he was trying to make money off of what didn't belong to him in the first place by overcharging these people what they owe the boss so that he would benefit from it. Two, he goes ahead and has them change a promissory note, which ultimately gets them in trouble, not him, and he walks away free and clear. And yet Jesus is saying that this person is somehow held up as an example. And Jesus goes on to say, we are all really good with things that have to do with this world. Look, somewhere around January, February, we all get those things in the mail. They're called W-2 forms, And automatically, right, you start sitting down and you start going through all of your expenses, right? And if you bought something for your dog that you thought in any way, shape, or form might pass the IRS, you would include that in the reimbursement or the deductible, right? Don't we all sort of think like that because this is our world, this is where we live, this is what we do. When we go to buy things, when we go shopping, right? Don't we always look for like the sales, the bargains? Now, when we walk around, don't we look at those bargains? And while you're standing in the store, you are pulling up the Amazon app to see whether or not it's cheaper through Amazon, right? Everyone's laughing because it's true. This is what we are. But this is why? Because it has to do with us. It has to do with our possessions. It has to do with who we are. It has to do with what benefits us. And so we are very attentive to doing that. When I enter into a business contract with an individual, there's a lawyer, and the lawyer reviews things, and there is a full-out negotiation. Why? Because the outcome, even the outcome that's not immediate, God forbid my partner passes away, if it's not in language somewhere that I get the option to buy the rest of the company, his wife or husband could end up being my partner who knows absolutely nothing about this business and causes me more gray hair than I have currently. And so, right, we're always negotiating things that are important to us. And Jesus is simply saying, in all of his messaging, he has come to tell us that God the Father loves us, that there is a kingdom, that the kingdom exists, that the kingdom is now, and the question is, how shrewd will we be to make sure that we inherit the kingdom? And so what Jesus is challenging us to be is, do we consider his message, his mission, his ultimate good news, do we find those as important to us as getting a tax benefit, so that we structure ourselves and we live a life and we think a certain way that makes sure that we inherit eternal life? Jesus is asking, do we feel the same way about him, about the Father, about everlasting life, about salvation and redemption? Do we feel the same way about those things as we do about the things that we bump up against to in everyday life? That's what he wants to know. And he's challenging us whether or not are we so sensitive and conscious of that reality in our life that everything else gets adjusted and changed so that we accomplish and achieve life with God in heaven. And I think the point is, Jesus is saying, probably not so much. Probably not so much. Because we think the things of this world are more important than what happens next. And he goes on to say, which has been talked about for centuries, generation upon generation, you cannot serve both God and man. There has to be a focal point. One side of the scale tips heavier than another. And the question is, how is our scale tipping? And if it's not tipping in favor of God, why? Because Jesus says there's going to come a time where the steward will be asked, make account for what you've done. God the Father will ask us when we stand there, make account for what you've done on earth. I have given you this amazing gift of life. I have breathed my own spirit into you. I have surrounded you with opportunity upon opportunity to worship and praise me and to love and care for your neighbors. The only two things I have asked for over and over and over again in the sacred scriptures. This is what I have asked. Give an account of yourself now. How faithful have you been to those possessions that I have placed in front of you? And we all have room for improvement on that. We all take God and one another for granted. I don't know why that is, you know. There is a scene in Excalibur, one of my favorite movies. It's one of those that, like, when it's raining outside, you put on a cup of coffee, you sit, you put on Excalibur, you know, and they have that music, you know, when they're running through the fields, and it's great. If you're absolutely bored, watch Excalibur. Anyway, there's a scene where Arthur has just won this huge battle, and they're up on top of a mountain, they're all celebrating, all the knights are there, they're all jumping up and around and all, and then Merlin steps in. And Merlin is a scary character wearing this funny hat, and he's got this staff that, of course, spits out fire. I mean, what good is a Merlin without a fire-spitting staff? And he stands there in the midst of all of them, and he says, silence. And the fire comes out, and he walks around, and he settles them all down. And he says, it is the doom of men that they forget. He says to him, enjoy this moment, because you're going to forget about this. It's going to pass. And you're going to forget what you've accomplished. And I think for us, I think we forget what Jesus has done for us. I think we forget what it is that we're required to do. And we do ultimately become much more focused on the here and now, the taxes, the buying, the selling, relationships, yada, yada, but not to the depth of the level that Jesus asks of us. This was as shocking to Jesus' audience as it is to us today, because they're all asking themselves, really? A shrewd steward is raised up as an example, but ultimately that person's raised up because that person has acted in their best interests, knowing what was about to happen to them. And I think the same has to be for us. We all believe that we are immortal. All of us. We all believe that we will survive and we will live forever until the time that we don't. And then when that time comes, we struggle with trying to reflect on our past life and see whether or not we've done everything we possibly can, and what is the future going to be for us. And if there is indeed this God and I'm in relationship with him, then when I stand before the king, what do I say? When I stand before my boss, what do I say? And I think for us, we tend not to be sensitive to what happens next or giving an account until we realize that our time, much like the steward,